Hello, everyone. This is Marc Young with XLM Solutions, and today we'll be talking about the 3DEXPERIENCE uh, data migration, options and different information around it. If anyone cannot hear me or has issues seeing the screen, please, raise your hand or speak up or put something into chat. Also, if you have any questions as we go, I will be monitoring them and may answer them as we go or wait till the end. With that, let's begin. Now, quick overview of XLM Solutions. We are a complete solution provider, mainly providing PLM solutions around the Dassault PLM products. So we're providing solutions around, obviously, 3DEXPERIENCE that we're talking about today, both the cloud and on-premise environment, SolidWorks PDM, Enovia Smart Team, and XLEAD. We've been in business since 2005, so we're bringing over 17 years of experience, and not to toot our horns, but we see that we're fairly highly respected within the PLM industry for both our business and technical expertise around PLM. We are a Dassault business partner along with a SolidWorks certified professional service company. So we're recognized both by Dassault and its sister company SolidWorks for providing services. We truly, have excellence and quality. We're always looking on, for new technologies, new best practices in the areas, building customer and partner relationships. So we're always on the forefront of what's new and what's best for our customers in the industry. And as today we're going to be talking about data migrations, we really provide expertise around all aspects of implementing a PLM solution, everything from discovery workshops, assessments, general implementation, customizations, integrations such as integrations to ERP systems, data migrations like we're going to talk about today, training and support, have industries in various expertise in various industries, ranging from everything from auto to aerospace to industrial equipment, medical devices. The list can go on. And in addition to our PLM expertise, we definitely have general IT expertise as well in different databases, operating systems, programming languages, etc. So with that, let's start. And I would say this, presentation is geared to 3DEXPERIENCE, but the concepts can really almost apply to any type of PDM or PLM, data migration scenario that you may have. So with that, we always say PDM data loading can be a daunting task, but with diligent planning and testing and having a good process in place, it really can go smoothly. And today we'll talk about some of these strategies or things to be aware of when running or starting or conducting a migration. So quick overview, we'll talk about pre-data migration analysis, talking about assessing the data, cleaning up the data, defining data loading rules. We'll talk about some different options or technologies you can use when loading data to 3DEXPERIENCE. And then we'll talk about how best to execute the actual data migration. So when we start, and people that have been on my webinars, I use this slide a lot. But when we start doing data migration projects, before we even begin, we want to do a good analysis or analyze, and scope out what's going to be involved. So when scoping out, the project, I like to break it into 4 kind of buckets that you see here. So first, understanding what that legacy data that we're going to be migrating is. Is it files and folders, from a Windows operating system on some network? Is it going to be what I call a legacy system, like a legacy PDM, PLM system that probably has a database and vault behind it, whether it's, Enovia Smart Team, SolidWorks PDM, Windchill, Team Center, Autodesk Vault. All those systems have, a database and file store vault behind it. Have we ever dealt with hard copies? There's situations where we have customers that still have files that are in a filing cabinet, and we've developed solutions to actually scan them and automatically load the data in. And with that, what types of data are we dealing with? Is it CAD data? In many cases, it's CAD data, and when dealing with CAD, 3D CAD, you really need to deal with the internal links and relationships between the CAD files. But it could be, just simple Office files or PDF files, or it could be just metadata, just BOM structures and no files behind it. So, really have a good understanding of what that data is. We also, going to the second bucket, we need to understand, where that data is located and, and if there's any problems with it. So, can we get access to the data? Is it in a network system? Do we have access to the network and the folders? If it's in a legacy system in a database, can we get access to that database and be able to query and run reports within the database? Or can we use the third-party APIs to access the data? Is all the data there? Are there cases where data could have been deleted or missing or any known issue, but could there be situations where the data is missing? And if so, is that accountable? How are we going to deal with it? Is it a known issue, and or do we have to come up with a solution to handle it? Dealing with CAD data, missing links. Are the links and relationships to the files in place? A lot of times when we're dealing with data loading, the missing links is a big issue because the files may be there, but the links or references within the files are not working correctly. And then finally, perhaps we need to bring in additional experts. If that, system, normally we're experts in 3DEXPERIENCE, and we can reverse engineer and have expertise in many legacy systems, but we'll fully admit we don't always have the expertise in every system. So we may need to bring in an expert to help get the data out so we can properly migrate it. Then we talk about mapping rules, and probably a lot of the mapping rules won't be known at the beginning of the project, and they will evolve as the project is conducted. But we should kind of get an understanding of how data will be mapped over to 3DEXPERIENCE. So, what are the property mappings? What, the metadata, the part number, revision, description. What metadata do you have, and what fields within 3DEXPERIENCE will they be mapped to? State mappings. Depending on where the legacy system's coming, the main states in 3DEXPERIENCE are private and work, frozen and released and obsolete. So how will the data be mapped into some of those states in 3DEXPERIENCE? Revision conformity. You can have different revision patterns within 3DEXPERIENCE. Will the legacy data coming over, will the revisions of that match that revision pattern that's set up in 3DEXPERIENCE? And if it's not, how do we handle it? Type mappings or collab space mappings or bookmark mappings. So, type mappings, I would say, is, there's different types within 3DEXPERIENCE, whether it's a physical product, a document, a drawing. Depending on how you configured 3DEXPERIENCE, you may subtype it to create additional types within the system. So, what types will the data from the legacy data be mapped to 3DEXPERIENCE? There's some probably default assumptions, like a document would go over a document. Whether you're dealing with CAD data goes and gets created as physical products. But depending on how you configured your 3DEXPERIENCE and depending on your requirements, there may be, more detailed mapping rules. Where will that data go in 3DEXPERIENCE? So what collab space or bookmark would that data get go to, get set or linked to. If you're using classification within 3D Experience, do we need to classify that data as well? And then, what are the, other links or other special logic that we may need to incorporate when doing the mappings? So, we had an example where customer had TIFF files, and they had a sheet per each TIFF file, but multiple sheets made up a single drawing. So as part of the migration process, we merged the TIFFs together into a single file, a multi-sheet TIFF, and then this loaded that multi-sheet TIFF. Or, in 3D Experience, viewable files, depending on how you load the data, whether it be a CGR or a file that is viewable through 3D space, might need to be created as part of the data mapping. So not that just the source data is there, but the viewable files there to be viewed as well. And then finally, we talk about volume of data. Obviously we want a good understanding of how much data there is that we're loading. That might affect how long it will take to load the data. Usually you don't know how long it takes to load the data until you actually do a data migration. But we should be able to make a estimate at this time and understand, can this be done over a weekend? Does it have to be done over multiple weekends? Perform a delta load, etc. And kind of get a high level, visibility of what that cutover load, plan would be. Asking, the end customer migrating, can we can we allocate a full weekend for the migration? Can we have the system down for a couple extra days to do it? Do we have less than a weekend time to do it? If you are in, multi countries and multi time zones, that weekend time might get cut due to time zone factors. So we want to analyze all that up front to help scope out and determine what's involved in the migration. Many times we've seen that migration projects, appear to be easy, and then you get into the details and become much more complicated. So it's, very important to do your homework up front to really understand what you're getting involved with. As part of the data migration is data cleanup. And I'd say usually every project involves some type of data cleanup in one way or the other. A lot of times we'll ask our end customers, how clean is your data? Will everything map over correctly? And they say, oh yes, our data is great. And then you go start doing the migration and you run into issues. So probably there's some good reporting or analysis that may want to be done pre-migration to understand how that legacy data is going to look and behave. And there's some, common scenarios that we look for. So duplicate part numbers. Now in that case, you have two part numbers in the system, but they point to different files or the same file. So you could have part 123 that points to washer one, dot cat part, and part 123 that points to washer two dot, SLD PRT. Are those truly the same file? Are they different files? Are they should they be different part numbers? What's the rule to handle that? Likewise, we could have duplicate file names. So you have washer, maybe you have part number 123 that points to washer one, but you have part number 456 that points to washer one. So again, is that representing, the same part and it was just created twice, or there's a different logic? In many cases, we see or hear that, the same parts in the system multiple times just because people weren't able to find and reuse it. So is this a good time to clean that up and possibly reduce or combine some of the data you have in the system due to duplication? Missing or incorrect file attributes. When we migrate data, let's say key attributes are part number, revision, description. Well, what happens if one of those attributes are missing? Should we automatically fill in a default value? Should the end customer report upon it and fix it? How should that data be handled? If key attributes don't have data associated to it. Missing or incorrect file associations and links. It's like I was saying before, where the links between the CAD files don't work or are broken, and again, do they need to be manually cleaned up? Can we write a utility to clean it up and handle it? But that's more dealing with CAD relationships. Multiple or no links to organizational structure. So in 3DEXPERIENCE, all data needs to be in a collaborative space. There's a security vector that deals with the organization and collab space. So all data needs to be associated to a security vector. And in the legacy data, will the rules or the metadata be there to make sure that the data can be associated to the correct collab space and organization? And then, as mentioned, having the non-compliance revisioning. So the revision pattern might be A through Z, but what happens if we get a revision that's 1 or 2? How should that be handled? So these are some things just again to be aware of. We have some utilities out there to help report against it and find such information. But usually when you're getting into a data migration project, expect that some data cleanup will need to happen. Also understand that when you're migrating data to 3DEXPERIENCE, it's probably 3DEXPERIENCE is going to behave differently than your legacy system. So a lot of people, when they're looking in migrations, they try to say, well, just duplicate the same functionality and the same fields we have in the legacy system in 3DEXPERIENCE. And I would say, you don't always want to just reinvent the wheel in another system. You really need to understand how 3DEXPERIENCE works and understand how that mapping will be done to handle how 3DEXPERIENCE works to its best abilities. So understand how things are different. Understand how you can access files, data in 3DEXPERIENCE, how you search for data in 3DEXPERIENCE, how permissions work in the different systems, what licenses your users will have, and what per those licenses, what will the users be allowed to or not do within the system? What metadata fields are there out of the box, and workflows or maturity states. So those are some of the key things that 3DEXPERIENCE handles in its own unique way. So a good understanding of how these topics work need to happen to help perform that mapping exercise. Also, it's a great time to review the end customer, your processes, your working processes, and make updates. A data migration project, I look at it as not just migrating data over, but transforming the data and transforming how you work within the new system and possibly new processes. So data migration is a great way to review how you work, maybe update the processes, and manipulate the data being migrated to handle possibly new or improved processes within the system. And again, this isn't like a one-time thing. It's probably as the project goes around, migration projects on average, I say, are 3 to 4 months in length. So as that migration process commences, new information will be found and tweaks will happen to both how how 3DEXPERIENCE will be defined, maybe the process, and how the data should be migrated. So it's an evolving step, very, let's say, agile as migration goes. But the key thing for doing migrations is if changes are made, whether it's to the 3DEXPERIENCE data model or the process or even the migration code, it's really important to test and migrate the data to make sure none of those changes affects the current migration technologies that are in place. And with, all that being said, there's always a balance between, how much you're going to automate, how much you're going to, transform your data, how many resources you want associated to the project, the cost, or I'm sorry, the time to actually do the migration or to have the systems configured to do the migration. How many resources do you need to do all that, and the price. So, a lot of we try to automate close to everything to make the migration as simple as possible. But sometimes, it's better to have some manual tasks within the migration to reduce the cost or the overall time of the migration, or maybe migrate, just latest data versus full history to reduce, number of data being migrated, which possibly could reduce the cost. So there's always a balance based on, what are the requirements, what's the time frame, what's the number of resources, and the cost to do it. And we're here to help, propose what we think is the best balance to get, the best bang for your buck when doing such migrations. So when migrations take place, all that being said, it kind of boils down to what we see as two main types of systems where data is set. So one is, as I mentioned, Windows file-based, a folder structure on the network or your local machine. When doing migrations from this, we really, and especially when dealing with CAD data, we need to traverse through all the files. We may need to open up the files to read properties within the files, understands the links and the relationships in the files. So it may take longer to analyze and extract the data because we need to touch upon all files. Also, when dealing with a Windows file-based system, usually we're loading latest only data because it's, difficult to maintain full history within a folder structure. It can be done, if users rename files and put an underscore revision at the end, or have different directories to handle different revisions. So it can be done, but if we needed to load full history from a Windows file-based system, it makes it more difficult because not only are we, traversing the files, but we probably have to rename them and update links to handle the history associated to the files per how it's managed in the directory structure. The other option is, the database systems, as mentioned, Smart Team, Microsoft SharePoint, or other legacy systems. Usually these are faster to extract the data because we're reading from the database directly, and all that information like links, properties, etc., are in the database. Though it definitely requires understanding of the source system where that data is coming from, understanding the database the data is stored in to make sure we read the proper tables and fields to get the data out in the, that's required for the import into 3DEXPERIENCE. So it can be faster, but it requires some of that knowledge, which may be something you have, we have, or a third party has, to read that source system data model. So when dealing with data extractions from a legacy system, the person doing the extraction should have familiarity with the legacy system, how it works. Most legacy system databases can be reverse engineered. So, everything that you see on this list, I'm not going to say I'm an expert in everything, but we were able to look at it, understand where the key data is set, and be able to get the data out. You should also have the ability to read the file properties and links, especially if properties aren't in the database or links are broken and need to be fixed, let's say, quote unquote, on the fly while doing the migration. And again, here's just an example of different systems that we've migrated, from and to 3DEXPERIENCE, to name a few. when doing migrations, usually we break the data into two or three parts if you want to look at it. So the first part is extracting the data, and we will normally extract it to a neutral file format like a CSV file, an XML file. We can direct it directly to a format that 3DEXPERIENCE can read and import. So depending on different out-of-the-box tools within 3DEXPERIENCE, we could extract it directly to a format that it can read and import. And then XPDM is a technology, again, which is a specific format within 3DEXPERIENCE using the XPDM tools, which I believe stands for access and transfer PDM data into 3DEXPERIENCE. So XPDM really is an XML type of format, but we can extract data to this XPDM format, which then can be used for some of the out-of-the-box tools within 3DEXPERIENCE to load the data. Part of the extracting the data is quote unquote transforming data, and I kind of gave some examples. Maybe we have to transform alpha revisions to numeric revisions if the numeric pattern is being used for revisions in 3DEXPERIENCE. Or I gave that merging TIFF file example, where as part of the migration, we merged TIFF files together and then loaded not the individual TIFF files, but the multi-sheet TIFF files into the platform. So talking about, I'm switching out to different technologies that can be used to load data into 3DEXPERIENCE. The first one may be manual, maybe brute force. It just may be easier, get a bunch of interns to load data. I would say that's good for small set data sets, but you are manually doing it. It's possibly prone to human errors, and not that it can't be done, but it makes it more difficult to load full history. Because of you would have to have that history already set up to load it and then manually revise and reload data. Automated, which is a key thing we use a lot of times. So depending on the data to be loaded, you can make use of JPOs within 3DEXPERIENCE, the MQL tool, tickle scripts to load the data. Now, a good point that maybe I didn't mention at the beginning is when loading data to 3DEXPERIENCE, you really need to understand if you're loading data, if you have the Dassault public cloud or you have some type of on-premise or private cloud solution. So today, loading data to the Dassault public cloud, and I'm really distincting the Dassault public cloud versus a private cloud, is very limited in how we can load the data. So a lot of these options that I have here are not applicable to the Dassault public cloud, but would be applicable to on-premise or private clouds. So definitely keep that in mind. My main assumption through this presentation is that it is a on-premise or private cloud. If it is a Dassault public cloud, there are some options and there's some new technologies being released in future versions to handle migrations, but you are limited in what you can do. So please keep that in mind. But an automated way can be used these MQLs. There are now 3DEXPERIENCE web services, and for public cloud, more and more web services are being available to load data. What's nice about automated is it can be fully customizable. So we really can control any rule, any scenario that is needed to make that migration work. We have full control of how the data is being exported, how the data is being transformed, and how the data is being loaded into 3DEXPERIENCE. 3DEXPERIENCE Adaplets. This is a little bit of an older technology that came from the Matrix 1 days. but it allows you to kind of load data to a database table within 3DEXPERIENCE, and then through that table, you can really suck it in, through this Adaplet, suck it into 3DEXPERIENCE. The good thing about Adaplets is it's very fast. You can load data, millions of records within hours. It's extremely fast, but it really requires you to have extensive knowledge of 3DEXPERIENCE and its table structure, and APIs. So you really need to have a very good understanding of the 3DEXPERIENCE database table structures. And it's, the jury's out if it's still officially supported by Dassault itself. I mean, the technology is still there, but we've heard that it's not officially supported, especially for data migration. So, pros are that it's extremely fast. Negatives is you're kind of on your own, and you really have to have that extensive knowledge of 3DEXPERIENCE. And then finally, there's this XPDM, which I mentioned. That's a transport framework technology. It's really geared to loading CAD data into 3DEXPERIENCE. So if you need to load CATIA data, SolidWorks data, this XPDM format and the XPDM tool can load that data in and build a lot of those viewable files, build the necessary links, etc. The EDAT tool, I don't know how many people have heard of EDAT, and I have a slide on it, but EDAT today is built upon this XPDM data format. You can handle custom migrations with it, but there is some limits there versus a fully automated method that I mentioned above. And for some functionality, for example, if you wanted to convert CATIA V5 data to CATIA 3DX or CATIA V6 data as part of the migration, XPDM actually supports that, but it requires an additional license, an MUX license, to perform that conversion. So talking about some custom scripts and programs, we like to say it's best suited for large data volume migrations. You really have full control, so you can manipulate both metadata and files at the same time. Really, like I said, develop or implement any rules you may have. You may build relationships, maybe created what I say on the fly programmatically. So, if all your drawings are in one folder and all your models are in another folder, you can build the relationships between those, as it goes into 3DEXPERIENCE, or change the relationships as they go into 3DEXPERIENCE to handle how 3DEXPERIENCE wants those relationships to be constructed. Definitely can write your own logging and error handling. So, dealing with hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, millions of records, there's always these small cases where things break. So having the ability to have your own logs and error handling to handle those situations can be very beneficial. As mentioned, any complex data loading scenario, we kind of have the code or control the code, so we really can control, or handle any scenario that comes in place, and really can support any type of rule that may be present. Whether it's dynamic determination of the target directory, collab space, modifying data, reformatting the data, changing revisions, states, or something, anything else as it goes into the system. So really it gives us that complete flexibility there. This is sort of an example of Enovia Adaplets. I took this, it's an older slide, I took it from Dassault. But basically how it works is, you have your different legacy systems out there, and maybe you just have one, but you use that, per, APIs or SQL to write the data you want to load to what's considered an Adaplet staging database. So you write that data to that staging database, which needs to mimic what your 3DEXPERIENCE data model database looks like. And then through different technology, you can export that to a EDAT text file, and then through that you can import it directly into your Enovia and V6 Vault. And it, like I said, it goes extremely fast, but is it supported? And having the staging database, having it be the correct data structure is the key part. And if you're missing, key fields, or you populate an internal field incorrectly, you'll cause issues down the road. So, if that's something that needs to be done, mainly around time constraints, you really need to be cautious that you have everything right and do the proper testing and validation on it. XPDM, this is where I'd say a lot of migration technologies are going today. And this 1 second here. There was a question, but I don't see the question now, so perhaps we'll come back to it. Sorry about that. I'll get back to the questions later. XPDM. All right, I'm sorry. The question was, what unique challenges have you had when migrating from a file-based system to the UPS data model? There can be all sorts of challenges, but everything I said is a challenge. So having bad links between the files in the folder structure, having missing data in the folder structure, if we had to deal with full history from the folder structure. So all those scenarios can cause issues, and then determining the best technology to use to load that data from the folder structure to 3DEXPERIENCE. So any challenges really very customer specific, but what I mentioned, are some of the unique situations that we encounter. Bad links, bad metadata, being the key ones. Okay, I'm sorry for the interruption. Going back to like I said, XPDM is a technology that many people are using today to import to 3DEXPERIENCE. As mentioned, it can convert CATIA V5 to CATIA 3DX. You need to structure, and what you see here is kind of what that XPDM XML file format looks like. So you need to properly structure your XPDM files. There's structured for, the structure is documented. So there is documentation on how to structure it, but it handles, physical products, which is kind of the bill of material structure, 3D shapes, which are your CAD models, documents, and links and relationships between it. Drawings too. You can automate it. It does require this EXH license and MUX for that CATIA to CATIA 3DX conversion. You get the tool, so you create these XPDM XML files, but to load them in the system, you need a native CATIA app tool. So you need a native app tool to load the XPDM files. This is really what's the supported migration process by Dassault. You can add additional rules and logics by creating what's considered cat rule files. So for example, let's say in my source data, we have the owner set up to be the name Marc. So owner, let's say, would be set up for Marc, but really we want the owner to say Elon when we migrate the data. We can write a cat rule or write logic that says if owner equals Marc, set owner equal Elon. So so you can write some logic to handle unique situations. You can also set up property mapping rules in what's considered a PDM custom config file. So we could say, for example, cage code from Smart Team will go to a different cage, we'll go to plain old cage code in 3DEXPERIENCE. So we can set up different mapping rules as well. I would say the tool is, though, very sensitive to failures. If you have data wrong, if you have bad data, spaces at the end of file names, can all cause failures with the import. So it's again very proper, very important to have that data clean, and I'd say extensively clean to handle XPDM, because it can be very data sensitive, and there's logging in the tool. I would say the logging can be improved, and I believe it will be improved coming out in 22 XSP5. There is logging, but sometimes it's tedious to find the issues within the logs. And then there is EDAT. So EDAT is a tool. It stands for Enovia Development Acceleration Toolkit. But this is a tool provided by Dassault, or really provided by Dassault at a cost to partners, that can help accelerate your data migration projects. So there's EDAT tools out there, from going from Designer Central to 3DX powered by, from SolidWorks PDM to 3DX powered by, from Smart Team to 3DX powered by, which I probably have the most experience on, and then also file-based to 3DX powered by. So this FDK tool may be an option for the file-based systems to powered by, but there are still issues and challenges with it. So the EDAT tool comprises of 3 parts: an analyzer to analyze the data, an exporter to export the data out of the legacy system, and then an importer to import it into 3DEXPERIENCE. As mentioned, it's based on the XPDM Import technology. It also makes use of a local ActiveMQ server. That's kind of the screenshot you see here, to kind of queue up migration jobs. And it makes use of a SQL Express database to keep track of what has been migrated. There is a lot of details, I would say, to make EDAT successfully. There is documentation for EDAT, but there's a lot of, I'd say, you learn as you go. So there's a lot of knowledge just from, having experience in it. So if someone is doing an EDAT migration, feel free to reach out to me. I have a lot of stuff that I found out just by executing it versus what's documented. It's also license-based, and the license-based on the MAC address of the machine running the EDAT tools, plus having the licenses necessary to run XPDM. It supports, mainly tested around SolidWorks and CATIA, but it should support really any CAD tool that there's a powered by integration for. So it should support Inventor data, Creo data, etc. Some things, what I say, the good and bad and ugly about the EDAT tool. Like I said, it's the official method to load data into the platform. Really, you need it for loading CATIA data. A lot of the other solutions doesn't support CATIA data because of the internal CATIA links. You can convert the V5 to 3DEXPERIENCE, as I mentioned. It supports mapping and data manipulation of the data, so you can really put in some of your unique data migration rules. Supports delta loads, so you could do a big load, over 2 months, and then just do a delta over the weekend. So that's good. Those are all the good things. Some of the things that probably could be improved is it's a slow tool. It takes time to load the data, and that's probably where the delta load support comes in. There are logs, but it can be tedious to review the logs. As mentioned, it can be very data sensitive. So certain quote unquote bad data cases will cause the tools to fail, and then sometimes it's difficult to figure out where that issue is. When migrating, especially for Smart Team, it's very good for basic data models. But if you have a highly complex or customized data model, you would probably need more than just EDAT to help migrate the data or transfer the data out. And anyone running the migration or EDAT tool should not only have good experience with 3DEXPERIENCE, but good experience of the legacy system, whether it's Smart Team, PDM, Designer Central, etc. And as mentioned, experience is king. There's a lot of information that you learn as you go that's not always documented. Some migration considerations, and I know we're getting close here, so I'll try to go faster to give time for more questions, or we'll just let it go a little bit longer. But again, very important to understand what those mappings will be and how they work, how you're mapping types, possibly relationships, attributes, policies, lifecycle states. Objects uniqueness. So in 3DEXPERIENCE, an object is considered unique based on its name, revision, and type. So keep that in mind. So making sure no duplicates would get created in the system. In many cases, we can set up this simple number generator to make that name field unique. Depending on the data, there's certain characters that are not supported within 3DEXPERIENCE. Now, most of these characters, these are the characters that are not supported, aren't supported in file names either. So you're pretty safe, but in the context of SolidWorks configuration names, these characters are also not supported. So you need to be careful of that, and you may have to clean up some SolidWorks configuration names if these characters are in there. Or, and I believe this is fixed, but in instance names within CATIA products, these characters are not supported as well and may need to be cleaned up. But I believe this, for the CATIA instances, that issue has been resolved in the latest XPDM versions. More migration considerations, as mentioned, you're gonna have different data models between your legacy system and PLM. Make sure you understand both and handle the differences. And if one works one way and 3DEXPERIENCE works the other way, really understand how you want it to work to figure out how that data should be migrated. Any migration should allow customers to grow within the new PLM functionality. We never want to migrate data, that once it gets migrated, 3DEXPERIENCE can't be expanded, or new functionality in 3DEXPERIENCE can't be used against that data because how it was migrated. So whenever we do migrations, we make sure it appears the same way as if that data was created through the native system. And with that, you got to make sure the correct internal fields are set. When conducting large data migrations, we want to do it over a reasonable time frame. The goal is to load any data, over hopefully a weekend time frame or a long weekend for very large migrations. We always try to do single migrations, what we call a big bang, load everything in one time. And this can be done by having multiple systems load data in parallel, increasing performance of the machines, etc. But if we can't get that data loaded over let's say a weekend, then there's always that migrate the data in Delta. So we can always do a Delta migration, but not only do you need to test the migration, you need to make sure your Delta works. So it's only extracting the Delta data and it's properly loading the Delta data correctly. So if the Delta migrations need to be done, you probably need a little bit more time added to the project to do the proper testing and validation of not just the migration, but the Delta drive, the Delta part as well. And as mentioned, some things to speed up migrations is hardware. SSD drives, adding more memory to the database, having multiple drives for better input, output, etc. So best practices, we always say install 3DEXPERIENCE out of the box and make sure you have a good understanding of how it's working out of the box first. Do your due diligence to review the legacy system, identify what data you want to migrate, put together those mapping and rules or data reorganization transformation rules, detail any concerns you may have, and understand what that cutover plan will be. Make sure you have a test environment to do tests. no migration works the first time correctly. So there will be issues, and make sure you have a test environment to test and validate in. Pick the best technology to migrate or develop the solution in and do the migration. As I mentioned, there's different technologies out there and ways to migrate data. There's different ways to skin the cat. So making sure, and we can definitely recommend what we think would be the best solution given the data migration requirements. Any migration probably will take 2 to 4 test cycles before we're ready for a production migration. So, be prepared to have multiple test cycles, be able to run a test, clean the environment, and then do another test. With data validation, we say only you, the end customer, can validate the data. We can validate certain things, but it's very important to have your own people in there looking at the data, validating the data, and make sure the data is good. Plan for production rollout and set user expectations. There will definitely be a learning curve when using 3DEXPERIENCE for the first time. So make sure users are properly trained and people are available to support them. And then finally running the production migration. So with that, I'd say, any migration, make sure to put the proper testing in the process. I'd say one of the most important things is testing and doing the proper testing. So have a good test plan that covers all test scenarios. Do a test that deals with large assemblies. Do a test that has assemblies using standard parts. Do a test with data going through a change. Do a test where you combine legacy data that was migrated with new data that was created. And have actual users run these tests. So you may need to document for the users what tests they should do, but have users run tests. I'm sure the issues will be discovered, whether it's legacy data with the legacy issues, bugs with how the data was migrated, procedural of the data, how 3DEXPERIENCE is configured. But there will be issues, and you'll need to fix the issues, rerun the test, redo the testing, and test again. And usually with any migration, there's various tests. At the simplest, there's an extraction test and an import test, an extraction task and an import task. But make sure you document the procedures, what tasks you need to run to do the migration, how long each task will take to do the migration. So when you run it, multiple times, you're following a good checklist or recipe to make sure things are done properly. Pre-data loading planning, some basic planning. Pre-data loading planning, when you're ready to do that production migration, you'll need to obviously work with the business, determine when that legacy system will be turned off. You should have a good time of how long that data load will take. So you'll know if you need a weekend, a long weekend to do a delta, that will all be defined. And maybe you can even do it during business hours, but you'll need to define that. You'll need to specify the data loading process. Well, you should have everything documented, so that should be done, but you'll want to define what are the different activities, who will be responsible for the different activities and events, and like I said, make sure you have that documented and identify the people responsible for the different parts of the data loading process. Perhaps there's someone that's going to turn off the legacy system or make it read-only, someone that's going to support the migration, and then people will be available pre-go live to test and validate the migrated data. And then the necessary IT personnel to make sure all the networks, disk spaces, etc., are working properly. So with that, I would say with proper planning and testing, the final data load should go smoothly. Make sure to follow your documented procedures, allocate buffer time for any unexpected issues, and then be prepared to support the users in the new system. So we like to say, with the proper testing and everything, it should be close to an easy button to click off and run to go smoothly. With that, this is this webinar today, but we have 2 more webinars coming up this summer that we think you may be interested in. And emails will go out, but this will be a webinar on a customer implementation we did. I think it'll be very interesting. A lot of good stuff and best practices of what this customer did and how they implemented 3DEXPERIENCE. And then we'll do a webinar on project management. So please take note of these, but if you're on this webinar, you should get emails about these other webinars. And then we can open it up to questions. A couple more questions came up, but please type in questions into chat if you have any. How do you deal with old change notices? Do you map them to the product in the new environment? So dealing with change notices or legacy engineering changes, workflows, what we have done in the past, and there's, I'd say, not a good way to migrate that data to the current change action or change notice functionality in 3DEXPERIENCE. So what we've done is taken legacy change notices, legacy workflows, flow processes, and gathered all that information, converted it to a PDF. So all that legacy information is in a PDF, and then loaded that PDF to the platform as a document. And perhaps we created our own collaborative space and called it legacy, change notices. We could load all those PDFs that captures the legacy change notice information to that specific collab space. So we will, our best practice, and again, there's different answers based on different scenarios, but our best practice is to convert that data to a neutral format and then load that data in that neutral format like a PDF to the platform. There's a question that says, do these tools add bookmarks automatically during import? I'm thinking we can use bookmarks to replicate the folder structure. So the answer is the XPDM technology and the EDAT tools, which are tools from Dassault, do not load bookmarks automatically. You would need an automated way or a post-processing way to create the bookmarks and link it. So definitely there's ways to through migrations, to create bookmarks and link data to the bookmarks, but the XPDM tool or the EDAT tool that I mentioned does not do that as part of those technologies. And we could discuss offline that topic in more detail, or any of these topics offline if there needs to be more follow-up. Any more questions? Well, thank you everyone for attending this webinar. My contact is here. So if anyone wants to reach out with any additional questions, comments, etc., please do. I believe there's going to be a short survey following this webinar. Please fill that out if you can. And thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the webinar.